couple of times before in our midst.
Yes.
Those were real hot meetings, not
yes.
not online meetings. Yeah.
Very nice. Yes. I have also sent out some invitations.
Yes.
Some other
Those were real hot
some of them may also be joining on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, fine. Yeah. You see, even I have circulated in iPecto, so
I have also sent out some.
we do have a lot of
invitations.
Almost all the iPecto groups have shared it. So we have to affiliate.
Okay.
Do you want to? Okay. Okay then. So all of you, please cooperate by muting your microphones. Speakers have their microphones on. Others, please mute your microphones. Okay. Okay. So all of you, please cooperate by muting your microphones. Speakers have their microphones on. Others, please mute your microphones. In the session. So all of you, please cooperate by muting your microphones. Yeah, loud and clear. Speakers have their microphones on. Others, please mute your microphones.
today we have gathered for the second lecture of the National Lecture Series organized by the State Academic Committee of AKPCTA. As you all know, we had our inaugural session on 7th September. That was the day before yesterday. The session inaugurated by ISACTO National President Keshav Bhattacharya, Professor Keshav Bhattacharya, turned out to be an engaging session. We had a very thought-provoking lecture and a very vibrant discussion afterwards. The session was done by Dr. K.P. Rajesh from CIS Hyderabad, and he spoke on the topic, the idea of multidisciplinarity and the national education policy, and how reality and how it actually hides pretensions behind the reality representations that it has carried. Now, today we have with us Professor Arun Kumar, a renowned scholar, educationist, and economist. He will share with us his observations on NEP on the topic National Education Policy. Does it meet the challenge of knowledge generation? The Academic Committee of AKPCTA has always been sensitive and have always felt responsible for the academic, social, cultural, and other knowledge formations of our education system, as well as of society at large. AKPCTA was one of the organizations to respond to the NEP as well as the NEP, which was passed by the Cabinet recently on July 29. We responded immediately after it became public. And we have organized these series to keep the debate alive and loudly voice our dissent of the anti-people policy approved by the Cabinet. We hope to intervene critically as well as creatively and make the government realize the need to withdraw the same in favor of a more inclusive document, which would go in tune with the socialist pattern of educational philosophy. Speaking about our lecture series, I take this opportunity to tell you that our next lecture, the third in the series, would be conducted on 15th September, and we hope to have Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay of Calcutta University, who would share with us her views on the equity concerns in NEP. Now, coming back to the day's lecture, I'm extremely glad to introduce and welcome Professor Arun Kumar, a renowned scholar, as I said earlier. He's an educationist as well as an economist, and he's currently Malcolm S. Adishesha Chair Professor at Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. He was previously president of JNU Teachers Union. Now, on this occasion, I'm glad to note that Professor Arun Kumar has always had a very warm relation with AKPCTA. He has joined us twice before on different occasions for different kinds of deliberations. And I'm extremely happy to welcome Professor Arun Kumar. Welcome to our session, sir. A very warm welcome on behalf of AKPCTA and all of us gathered here. And the session will be moderated by Vijay Abraham, the joint convener of State Academic Committee AKPCTA. I welcome Vijay to the session. The session, the vote of thanks of the session will be delivered by Sanam Sadanam. He is also the joint convener of the State Academic Committee of AKPCTA. I welcome our President, Georgie Alexa, our General Secretary, Patnavan sir, our Vice President, as well as the Chairman of the State Academic Committee, Sri Kumar sir, our Vice President, Sheila Fisher, and the former Zonal Secretary of ISACTO, Olina Fisher, and all other working committee members, state committee members, academic committee members, the IT cell who is actually handling the live telecast in FB as well as YouTube, and all the members of AKPCTA to this function. All of you, I extend my heartfelt welcome to all of you. And a very special welcome to all those who are watching this live in FB and YouTube. A very warm welcome to one and all once again. Thank you. And over to Vijay. Vijay?
Thank you, Lakshmi teacher.
Okay.
Honorable Speaker of the Day, Professor Arun Kumar, Dr. Lakshmi Priya, convener of the AKPCTA State Academic Committee, Dr. Sanand, joint convener of AKPCTA State Academic Committee, honorable leaders and state committee members of AKPCTA, state and district academic committee members, fellow comrades and dear friends. Good evening to one and all. As Dr. Lakshmi Priya has said, our lecture series are widely streamed through various social media platforms like Google Meet, Facebook Live, and YouTube live streaming as well. AKPCTA has a clear agenda behind organizing a series of lectures on new education policy 2020. We are not here to criticize just because we do not share the political ideology of BJP and its associates. We take up this because we address the student community, particularly the weak, minority, and marginalized section of the society. We want to unveil the hidden agenda behind the sugar-coated 66-page policy document to the public. We want the academic community to critically assess and engage and to understand the policy and how it affects and controls the future education system in the country. AKPCTA strongly believes it's our responsibility to become voice of the voiceless and take the issues towards the common people who are still not aware of the policy that each one of the person in the country is about to get affected. After looking to the new education policy, it seems that Kasturi Rangan Committee is more and above the ground reality of the Indian society, coming out through an education system which is completely irrational, unethical, and highly caste-centric. I fear a young generation after a couple of decades would be highly exclusive and passive. There are plenty of issues, new economic, national education policy, right from the school education to the higher education. The proposition in the new national education policy, which has caused the most speculation, is that the mother tongue should be the medium of instruction up to the class 5 wherever possible. The policy proposes that reading and writing skills in other languages will be learned in grade 3 and beyond. However, an increased emphasis on the mother tongue as the medium of instruction is not without implications for the marginalized, especially in a country where English is widely associated with employability and privilege. And as teachers, we know that one of the reasons for the school and college dropouts is due to the lack of ability in communication in English, particularly for socially and economically weaker sections in the society. Class-based inequality will widen in India, and those who are able to afford English medium education move further ahead. The national education policy mentions the implementation of the three-language formula, which gives the states autonomy to decide which language are taught, as long as two of the three languages taught are Hindi and Sanskrit. What native languages are to be studied are not of much choice. Imposition of Hindi and Sanskrit can be considered as glossy coat on the oppressive Manusmriti. When coming to higher education, the introduction of foreign universities is not meant to improve the quality of higher education for sure. Earlier, National Knowledge Commission estimated that about 160,000 students from India study abroad at an average every year, spending about $4 million worth US. National Education Policy 2020 is also in tune with the National Knowledge Commission that India should frame policies for the entry of foreign institutions and hence retain the outflow of money from the country to abroad. So the picture is quite clear. It is not the quality of education that matters the most, the money for sure. This would certainly bring commercialization of higher education, which would lead to withdrawal of the government from the education sector. It would also increase the disparity of the access to quality education between the rich and the poor. So we are supposed to be very much aware and critical towards the commercialization of education, the saffronization of education, and the privatization of education. As we all are eagerly waiting to listen from the renowned academician, orator, it concerns me taking much of the time. AKPCTA are blessed to have Honorable Professor Arun Kumar, Malcolm S. Adisheshaya Chair Professor, Institute of Social Science, New Delhi, to lead the lecture today evening in our midst. On behalf of State AKPCTA Academic Committee, I earnestly invite Professor Arun Kumar to deliver his thoughts on national education policy. Does it meet the challenge of knowledge generation? Thank you. Over to you, Professor Arun Kumar, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. PG, for this. Let me try and share my slide so that we can begin the talk. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir, it's visible. No. So, Anil Kumar, sir, can you make it possible?
Is it now visible?
No, it's not yet visible. I think does not come up on my screen.
Anil, sir?
Yeah, visible and audible.
No, is the presentation visible? Yeah, it's starting.
Presentation is not visible. Yes, start.
Yes, sir, it's not clear. No. Anil,
Yeah,
okay,
it's
clear.
It's clear now. All the participants, please mute your microphones.
Okay, so I'd like to thank AKPCTA for inviting me to give this talk. It's my pleasure to be with you people again. I've been with you.
Can you please take slideshow? It's not started slideshow.
Okay. Is it?
Yeah, fine. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll be talking about the new education policy and does it meet the challenge of knowledge generation as has been already announced. Now, as an introduction, what is the vision of NEP? What I'll be doing is I'll be presenting it in three parts. I'll first look at what have been the problems of education policy as far as knowledge generation is concerned. What are the current challenges that are there? And then what does the education policy have? And then finally, what can we say about it? So the vision of the NEP as given in the document is that it envisions an education system rooted in Indian ethos that contributes directly to transforming India, that is Bharat, sustainably into an equitable and vibrant knowledge society by providing high quality education to all and thereby making India a global knowledge superpower. So this is the vision that is there. So since I'll be talking about knowledge generation, I'll be focusing entirely on higher education. I will not be talking about school education and other such matters which are there in this thing. And what I'll be speaking is based, partly on my book, Indian Economy Since Independence, Persisting Colonial Disruption, and the other book, which is Challenges Facing Indian Universities, which is based on a seminar that we as the Teachers Association held in JNU in 2004. So what is the challenge of knowledge generation today? That says that how we can generate new knowledge. That's the basic idea. Today, institutions have been under attack, and there's been an attempt to capture them. And the result, what has happened is that many institutions have got destroyed because the way they have been dealt with. So what is the role of higher education? There is the twin role of higher education. First is to take the next generation to the cutting edge of knowledge. The second is new knowledge generation to meet the challenges faced by society. So not only do we need to take the next generation to the cutting edge of knowledge, but we also need to generate socially relevant knowledge. Now it's quite clear that not everybody will reach the cutting edge of education, but many will do and many will actually go out of the system to do the various other jobs required in society. So we are concerned with those who will be doing the cutting edge and taking the challenge of generating new knowledge for society. So what are the challenges of higher education? We are lagging behind in the world in terms of knowledge generation. And largely what we do is we copy solutions, which suggests that there's lack of dynamism. And this lack of dynamism implies that knowledge is not being generated, the socially relevant knowledge. And large number of basic problems continue in spite of 70 years of independence, which also suggests that something is not quite right when large number of problems continue and we are not able to resolve them. So I've been asking this question since the 80s when I started attending seminars and so on, that why does the obvious not happen in India? The obvious, that in terms of education, poverty removal and various other things, we haven't managed to overcome these challenges in spite of a agreement amongst all that we need to do it. So there's something which is basically wrong. And I link that to knowledge generation, that we are not able to generate the knowledge that could help us overcome these challenges. Now, what are the specific issues in education that we need to worry about? There's widespread cheating in exams. There's the iconic picture of Bihar 4 years, 5 years back, where there are people standing on the window ledges and throwing chits inside. There's a violation of the University Acts in a variety of ways. There's a problem of common syllabus, and so on and so forth. There's growing plagiarism in research that one notices. There are growing suggestions for student loans and markets for financing higher education and education for students. Teachers are getting marginalized in the system. There's proliferation of coaching institutions and mug books. So children simply mug up and pass exams, And this is not new. I remember even in 1967 when I joined physics at St. Stephen's College, that was the case that, students used to mug up and pass exams, and do it very casually. So the new education policy's critique of these existing problems is quite mechanical and very bureaucratic. And that's why I would say that the understanding is quite weak, which is what I'll try and point out later on. So when the problems persist, I argue that these are basic problems and we need to recognize what the basic problems are and then act on it. So in generating new knowledge, what are the basic problems? We need to understand that, and then only will the action come. And what are the larger issues in education? So one of the main problems that we have faced is that there are larger forces at work. I remember reading in Suitable Boy that in the 50s, there was a discussion that was going on. And because in the leadership, there were a lot of feudal-minded people, they didn't want children of the poor people to have education. And I noticed that when I went in 1976 after switching from physics to economics to Hoshangabad district, there also the landlord told us, why do you teach these children? If they become educated, then who will give free labor to take my cattle and to take my goats to the fields? So in other words, there has been a resistance to the poor people getting education in India, not everywhere, but in large parts of India. So therefore, the issue is not just education alone, but the wider social setting in which we talk about education. And this is linked to the philosophical aspects of society and the knowledge generation and the place of academics in society, the place of universities and colleges in society. These are all interlinked. So what has happened of late after 1990 is that increasingly all these are linked to markets and everything is viewed from the point of view of the market. And that's why making money and the student's career have become more important than, how to generate knowledge, how to absorb knowledge. And that is, the underlying social wider perspective at the current stage. So if, the knowledge generation is not the key for students, it's only to pass exams so that they can, get some job. So it's like getting a passport, so degree is a passport. And then cheating becomes an easy way to get a good job because if you have good marks, then you can get a good job. And knowledge generation and absorption therefore becomes secondary. And today, teacher's voice is not heard. So the question is, why is the teacher's voice so weak in society today? I remember in 2014 when I was the JNU Teachers Association president and the new government had come, we were trying to meet the HRD minister and HRD secretary so as to voice our concerns about higher education and what could be taken on board in the new education commission, etc., that was being set up. But we could not get a meeting. Then we formed a coordination committee of Teachers Association of all universities of Delhi. And then we tried to meet and still we could not get time. So it showed that, there was not much concern about taking on board the teachers' concern about, higher education and what needs to be done. So the new education policy does not address many of the issues that concern the teachers today. And that's the problem that is there. Now, there's also the bigger problem of growing alienation in society and also in the education system. So therefore, the social interlinkages are getting weakened between education and society. And there are historical roots of this problem of alienation. These come from the colonial period. As Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya said in the seminar that JNU Teachers Association organized in 2004, he said that Gandhi had argued that education in India is alienating and it must be changed. And therefore, he suggested Nai Talim, which would, integrate the education with the real experiences of the people. That still is the problem. As Professor Thorat in the same seminar in 2004, he said for Dalits, education is alienating. They don't see it as linked to their own lived experience. And that's why Dalits have a problem with the education system. So this alienation has been quite widespread. And when we have weakened the link between teachers and students and made it very mechanical, that then further adds to the problem of alienation. And I'll come back to this issue of the weakening link between the teachers and the students. So as a result, what we find is that many students flounder in JNU or they fail in the IITs, even though they are the best, they are taking through widespread testing, but still the very good students who are able to make it to JNU and IITs, many of them flounder in terms of coping with the education that is being offered. And because of that, many research students face difficulties and then they resort to plagiarism. So we need to understand, many students have a language problem and therefore they're not able to understand, and then they tend to simply cut and paste, which becomes plagiarism. Now, what is the perspective that we have on education? The perspective is that, it's not just education by itself, but what do we expect from education? And that is the perspective that is necessary. So one may have full literacy, but one can be producing an undemocratic perspective, So the content of education is very important. And in this content, we can reproduce a very elitist education, we can reproduce a very consumerist perspective, we can reproduce a short-termist perspective of society, whereas we need to have a long-term perspective. So we may produce alienated individuals. So depending on the content of education, we can reproduce a variety of things that we don't want. We may not want elitism, consumerism, short-termism, alienation, but depending on the kind of education we give, we could be producing this. And therefore, today what we see is that the state does not want dissent. It wants to curb dissent. And businesses want cheap labor. Okay, they want low-skilled labor. So therefore, they don't need wider education. And that is a problem. Today, in the papers, it has been reported that Jamia Millia Islamia had a seminar, a webinar, where the VC talked about, how we have to separate students into the category of troublemakers and those who want to study. This is a very divisive kind of a thing where you want very, students to be very conformist rather than, people who would think independently and come to a conclusion that, they need to protest. Student protest movement has been widespread all over the world. But now the thinking is that we need docile students who simply come and who simply do what the bidding of the organizers of the education system is. So there's a desire to curb dissent, and which, as I'll argue, is not very conducive to knowledge generation. So the societal vision in India is very segmented and very feudal in outlook. As I said, in the Suitable Boy or what I saw in 1976, the feudal elements did not want education for the children of the poor. They didn't want poor people to get educated and demand better jobs. And this is what we see reflected in school education. The quality is very uneven. And in the 70s itself, you saw the division between good schools and the government schools. And a lot of the middle class and the upper classes who used to earlier go to government schools started going to private schools, which are in India called the public schools. That division has also entered higher education since 1990-91, where now you have private high-paying institutions and public institutions, which are now feeling the pain of a shortage of resources or an interference from the higher authorities. Now, this higher education, which was not segmented till the 90s, was a very democratizing influence in society, because the children of the rich, the middle class, and the lower classes, they were rubbing shoulders with each other, they would get to know each other, and therefore there was an empathy, there was a democratization that was taking place, but that is waning very rapidly with the children of the rich not only going to these private institutions, but going abroad. They have been growing from this century, beginning of this century, they've been going abroad after school or after BA rather than going for research. So this democratizing influence has been on the wane. And this is a historical continuity from Macaulay's policy, where education was meant to produce clerks and not thinkers. So the segmentation that has been taking place between the thinkers and the mechanical workers, that has a continuity from Macaulay's time, from the 1835 policy on education. And in a capitalist system, equality and equity are immaterial, but not in a democratic society. So we need to worry about the societal vision, whether we are going for equity, whether we have equality or not. Now, let's look at the challenges of education policy. What has happened is that teaching has been separated from research. This is a long-standing problem that we have, which is the bane of higher education. At the level of higher education, teachers need to acquire new knowledge and pass it on to the students and not make it very formalistic. Unfortunately, what has happened in the Indian education system is that large number of students simply learn by rote. Teachers come, they dictate notes or they write notes on the blackboard. The students copy them and they mug them up and they prepare specifically for exam. I remember in 67, my class fellows in St. Stephen's in physics used to come and say, if we prepare these 10 questions, we are sure to get 5 questions. And they would mug up those 10 questions and get 75% doing 1 month's work. So education became very formalistic and it doesn't have its link with the lives of the people. It's confined to classroom, it's theoretical and very mechanical. And I quote Richard Thain, who was an exchange scholar from Brown University to St. Stephen's College. And after he finished 9 months of education in St. Stephen's, he said, what kind of education is this? And this article was reproduced in the Hindu, the EPW, and various other places. And he said, children don't get an understanding, they simply mug up and reproduce that in the exam. And that's why I find that since 1984, when I started teaching in JNU, I was giving open book exams. And the students used to say, please don't give open book exams. We cannot think in the exam. So the students expect that whatever has been taught in the class, only that will come and they'll simply reproduce it. But they don't think that it is necessary to apply that. In an open book exam, one has to apply what one has learned in the class. But that is where absorption of knowledge is very important. And that does not happen if you only do rote learning. And that is because our education institutions and educationists have become highly bureaucratized. We function from 10 to 5. People come in at 10 o'clock and leave at 5 o'clock. So it is as if, you can close the file at 5 o'clock and then go back home and not have to think about the file. Whereas the task of an educationist doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, The process of thinking can go on even at night. I remember at Princeton University where I was doing PhD in physics, my guide, came at 4 o'clock in the morning to see how the, experiment was going. So, the commitment to knowledge generation is 24/7. It is not, that it's 10 to 5, unlike in many education institutions here in India. So as a result, what has happened is that this bureaucratization that has taken place, academics have considered ground to bureaucrats and politicians as far as policy making is concerned. And that's why you saw that in the commission that was set up, it was mostly bureaucrats who were there, or I would say even academics who had bureaucratized mindset. So what happens is that many of the people in the commissions and committees that are set up, they have a bureaucratized thinking which has very little connection with what is required in the education sector for new knowledge generation. Now, what is the framework that we are having at the moment in education? It is what I call marketization. Marketization equates an academic's work to that of factory or an office, and that's why it is said that the academics should be sitting in their room for 8 hours, or they should produce so many papers, and we have now introduced the API to measure the output of the academics, and your promotions, etc., are based on the API scores. Now, I recall Professor Higgs, who wrote a paper in the 60s, which was the basis of the Higgs boson or the God particle, which was discovered, I think, around 2012 or 2013. So Professor Higgs wrote an article after that, and he said for the first 15 years while at Cambridge University, he would write every year that he has not produced any paper. And then in the 16th year, he produced this seminal paper, which then, got the Nobel Prize for him. So in a sense, there are different models of doing research, of being creative, of generating new knowledge. This cannot be one size fits all. Unfortunately, in India, what has happened is we think that we can achieve standards via standardization. And this is a problem that was there earlier, and this is also the problem that underlies the new education policy. The critical aspects of knowledge generation relate to autonomy and accountability. But what happens in India is that autonomy and accountability are thought of very formalistic, or they are completely missing. The accountability has to be to the time frame of society, that is long term. It can't be a short term accountability. And long term accountability can only be given by faculty and by academics who are autonomous, who can think for themselves and who don't get subjected to what is the pre existing order of things. So one has to be very critical of knowledge that exists to be able to generate new knowledge. And that requires autonomy. And that kind of autonomy does not exist in most of the Indian education institutions. There are very few where this kind of autonomy is given to the academics. What I find is that, the institutions think that, they need autonomy, but they will not give autonomy down to the department or to the individual teacher. So the individual teacher is subject to the, interference by the head of the department, by the dean, and by the vice chancellor. So, one is expected to comply, but then that's not autonomy. Only those individuals who are autonomous will be accountable to society's interests in the long term. Now, there are new proposals, like as already mentioned, there are three kinds of institutions, the universities that are being mentioned now, Higher Education Funding Authority, MOUs with foreign universities, and all these will curtail autonomy in the name of autonomy. So what we have seen in the Indian context is that we talk about autonomy, but that in fact precisely undermines the autonomy as it should exist in the institutions of higher education. Now, another issue that has come up before us, which also the new education policy deals with, is the leadership crisis. Education institutions are led by those who have a bureaucratized mind. They think only in bureaucratic terms about how to control. And that's why in many universities you had district magistrates and inspector generals of police as the vice chancellors. It's seen as a way of controlling the institution. The institution is supposed to be very troubled and not functioning, and therefore a bureaucratic hand is needed. In fact, one has had even generals as the vice chancellors of universities. And I'm reminded of the letter between Professor Hill and Professor Bhatnagar in 1954. Professor Hill wrote to Professor Bhatnagar, who became the Director General of CSIR at that time, saying, what are you doing? You will undermine universities. All the good talent from universities will migrate to CSIR institutions. Then who will train the next generation of students? So Professor Bhatnagar wrote back saying universities are already destroyed because vice chancellors are all political appointees. But the problem is that even the directors of the CSIR could be political appointees. And the problem is that, if one is a bureaucratized person, then what one does is one surrounds oneself with sycophants who will keep praising the boss. And that will then marginalize the independent views of the independent thinkers. The independent thinkers will always challenge everything. So in a university or a college, decision making is slow because there's a lot of challenge from independent minded people. But what has happened increasingly is that the independent minded people who dissent, they are seen to be the troublemakers. So even though dissent is the essence of higher education, we have to differ from what exists so that we can generate something new. So compliance is not the essence of higher education, but bureaucratized minds, want to control. They want to have power, and therefore they suppress dissent. So Professor David Gross, who was my professor at Princeton University, and he got the Nobel Prize in 2004, and he was associated with the Theoretical Institute in Bangalore. He wrote sometime in 2012 or 13 that there's a leadership deficit in India. And he also made the additional point that in India we retire people at 60, even though that is the time when the maturity has come to be able to give leadership. So this is another issue, that the leadership is either bureaucratized or it's retired or it does not tolerate dissent in its institution. Then the next issue that comes up is the weakening of teachers. Teaching is a relationship character with the students. the teacher and the taught. This is being eroded very rapidly with the advent of technology, with the advent of API points, etc. So the inspiration to the young is declining because good teaching makes learning worthwhile. And if good teaching does not occur because the teacher is busy collecting API points, doesn't have time for teachers. I remember the time in JNU in the early days when you could see faculty members and students sitting in the lawn and discussing, sitting in the coffee house and discussing. That has slowly decreased. And now what you see are people are very busy, faculty rooms are closed because people are going for seminars and so on, because that's what gets them API points. It's not interacting with the students that gets them API points. So the students' induction into community is weakening because teachers were usually playing the role of, democratizing the students and giving them, a sense of belonging to the community. Dignity of the teachers has been eroded. The school teachers are nobody, and now the university and the college teachers are also considered to be nobody in society. And technology is being used to dispense with them. So increasingly, we are using technology to say you can join the Arizona course or the MIT course, and you can do this, that, or the other, get knowledge from Khan Academy, etc. But what it does is the role of the teachers, that is getting marginalized. And in that, the management also is interested because management wants to control and it doesn't want to give autonomy downward. So therefore, the management, is able to control better if technology is being used rather than teachers. So a large number of ad hoc and part-time teachers have been recruited, and that has weakened the teachers' movement. Between the permanent teachers and the ad hoc and the part-time teachers, there's a schism that has taken place. So the teachers' movement has weakened very considerably all over the country. For instance, I remember in the 80s when the Delhi University Teachers Association used to give a call. Out of the 3,000 teachers, about 600, 800 teachers used to turn up. When I was the president of the Teachers Association in 2014, Nandita Narayan was the president of the Delhi University Teachers Association, and she was working extremely hard. But even when she gave a call, hardly 20, 30 teachers turned up out of a teacher's strength of 12,000, because the ad hoc and part-time teachers just could not come out, and there were 4,000 of them. But even among the remaining teachers, not many would come out, to pick up the challenge that was being posed. So the philosophical challenges are that API has eroded the teacher's dignity. We go to conferences and then we demand certificates. So I remember Professor Thorat he was the president of the Economic Association, and he had invited me to give a keynote address there. And he said, 2,000 people have come, but they're all busy going around Udaipur rather than attending the conferences and meetings. So you had to arrange for dinner and lunch for 2,000 plus their relatives who came along with them, whereas the academic sessions were attended by 20, 30 people, and the plenary sessions by maybe 200, 300 people. So this API system has eroded the dignity of teachers. They are just going around trying to collect points very mechanically. So the question is, why is there lack of social commitment? Why this social commitment has declined? And I trace the root of that to philosophical aspects of knowledge generation. And that is one, there is loss of value of ideas over a long period of time in India. My mother, who was teacher of history, I used to ask her that why is it that we don't value ideas? We simply copy ideas from elsewhere. And she said in the 7th century, 6th century, 7th century AD, the Brahmins started saying that we have all the knowledge that there is. We don't need new knowledge. So therefore, the valuing of ideas then begins to decline. And that's why there's a loss of independent vision of society. We think we can ape Western modernity and become like Westerners, so our independent vision of society, that has deteriorated. So therefore, when the new education policy and others, they simply retrace past tradition of research, that's not relevant today. Because the past tradition of research was where, there's quest for knowledge, but that quest for knowledge has got diluted with the loss of independent vision of society. So, in India, we are a poor country. We should be able to give good education at a very low cost. But what we are doing is we are copying Western institutions. So JNU is told that you have to be like Harvard or you have to be like Cambridge, and other institutions are trying to ape. So we want to have fancy classrooms and fancy, equipment in the classroom. Whereas we are a very poor country. We shouldn't do that. And anyway, it's a contradiction in terms to say that JNU should be like Harvard or like Cambridge, because originality cannot be copied. That's a contradiction in terms. So JNU has to be JNU, Harvard has to be Harvard, and when JNU is JNU in the particular milieu of India, then only would it produce new knowledge which is socially relevant. So this the student-teacher relationship, which has weakened due to marketization, that's another philosophical challenge that we face. So what is the vision which is stated in the new education policy that is before us? So it is a very clever document, it is stating most of the things that need to be stated, Whatever was written in the last 10, 20 years has been stated in this document. So the vision stated in the document is that it ensured inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Importantly, how to learn. So learning how to learn. The teacher must be at the center of the fundamental reforms in the education system. We must provide to all students, irrespective of their place of residence, a quality education system. So nobody can differ from this vision. It encompasses all things. So higher education, which must form the basis of knowledge generation, knowledge creation and innovation. So it says that we will increase the gross enrollment ratio in higher education, including vocational education, from 26.3% in 2018 to 50% by 2035. And then the document has sections on a more holistic and multidisciplinary education, optimal learning environments and support for students, motivated, energized and capable faculty, equity and inclusion in higher education, teacher education, catalyzing quality academic research in all fields through a new national research foundation, transforming regulatory system of higher education. So these are all things that are fine. You are absolutely right. So whatever the critics have been pointing out in the last 10 to 20 years, and what I have been pointing out since my articles in EPW in 1987, one can say has been incorporated in the document. So the document is designed so the government can always say, we are doing everything that's possible, we are giving a holistic vision of education. The question is there anything missing? And the question can be answered if you look at the earlier policies. The earlier policies are also great, whether it be the 68 policy document or the 86 policy document. They also tried to be holistic. They also incorporated correctives to what was thought to be missing in education policy. They also suggested reforms that sought to correct what was missing. So the question is, when does what the policy say get implemented? So we have to look at why the earlier policies did not deliver, why they could not succeed, and why therefore this policy says that we will do what the earlier policies could not do. So to strengthen teaching, they suggested academic staff colleges, but that did not help in strengthening teaching. To strengthen research, they forced all teachers to do MPhil first and later PhD. That also did not strengthen research in the country. Now MPhil is being stopped because it said that the MPhil is redundant. The API system was introduced to measure the academics output, and incentives were offered for better performance through promotions based on API scores. That did not work because people started mechanically collecting API points. But as I said earlier, that destroyed the student-teacher relationship because interaction with the students did not get you any API points, whereas, attending conferences and writing mechanical papers and mechanical books, that got API points. So all this was very mechanical and very bureaucratized, and that's why it did not succeed. And that's what I'm going to argue, that if we do things mechanically and in a bureaucratized manner, then good intentions do not deliver. So policies are being made by very bureaucratized mindset. The proposals that come are coming from those who think of control, who think of how they can control the system. So many professors who are in the committees are also bureaucratized in their mindset. They only think of how to control the system, just like a police officer would think, or just like a bureaucrat would think, how to control the system so that it can function. And they believe that a fiat from above will set the system right. The belief is that teachers are inherently shirkers and they have to be set right to control at every step. And a feudal mindset exists of controlling juniors to gain more power in the system. So a feudal or a bureaucratized mindset always thinks of somebody above them as a person to be obeyed and somebody below them who has to be controlled, who must obey them. So it's the feudal mindset and the bureaucratized mindset which believes in control. And that's why they think of dissent as a malaise which needs to be eliminated. Now, Can standard be achieved by standardization, as I was arguing earlier? Can academics' productivity be measured very mechanically, like a time and motion study for a factory worker? It indeed cannot, because quality cannot be achieved via these stratagems. So, for instance, my head of the department can't come to my room and say, today you have to give a good lecture. Because a good lecture doesn't come because there's a fiat saying a good lecture has to be delivered. It comes from the heart. There are days when I'm not very well prepared, but the lecture goes very well. There are days when I'm very well prepared, but the lecture doesn't go so well. I can see that in the eyes of the students, whether they're understanding, they're not understanding. So there's a huge qualitative aspect which cannot be captured simply by time and motion studies. And this is especially true in higher education. Similarly, my vice chancellor can't come and say, today you have to write a good paper. It doesn't come like that because there's a fear. It comes from the heart. You work all day and you work for several months, and then you may get a good idea. So therefore, quality cannot be achieved by standardization. So standards cannot be achieved by standardization. But the entire framework, and that's why UGC in the early part of this century had set up a syllabus for every subject, and institutions were supposed to, follow that syllabus, a very standardized syllabus. Now, for the economics syllabus, we wrote a critique of what was wrong with what was being proposed in the syllabus. But the UGC did not consider that. And when the UGC team came to us in 2004 to review us, it said, are you following the syllabus or not? And we said, no, we have our own syllabus. And then they said, where have you copied it from? And we said, we have devised our own syllabus. So any good institution, any good academic could devise his or her own syllabus rather than have standardized syllabus. And that is the problem that is coming up again in this new education policy. So the big systems only think of standardization, which is antithetical to the originality that is very much required in the system of higher education. So the proposal is to incentivize excellence. Now, as I said, incentivizing is not necessarily the best way of doing it. Excellence comes from the heart, and it says that through appropriate rewards and fast-track promotion system for high-impact research and contribution, this can be very mechanically done. It need not be a question of quality. And if the system is bureaucratized, it would not judge the quality, it would only look at the quantity. So the question is, how do you measure the high-impact research and contribution? Today, there's a game that is played even in research journals as to who you quote and who you don't quote, and where you quote and where you don't quote, and you can get a high impact factor. So therefore, the question of quality cannot be addressed by standardization. And this is against the idea of different kinds of excellence. If Professor Higgs wrote a brilliant paper after 16 years, somebody can write a brilliant book after 10 years and may not do publication for the remaining 9 years. So we have to allow different kinds of research, different kinds of excellence in our education system rather than have a standardized one. So what is required is overall change in the system. The mindset has to change. The milieu of teaching and research, that has to change for good quality teaching and research to come out. Education has to be freed from the control of bureaucratized academic mindset. And often it is the vice chancellors, principals, and the deans who are the problem for the system because they promote psychophancy and they promote compliance from juniors. And they design the reward system accordingly. And therefore, this marginalizes the independent academic who's always questioning. And therefore, originality gets killed because academics are mind thinkers. And if you frustrate an academic, then the independent thinking goes. His thinking gets killed. So originality then gets killed. So what is needed is to promote questioning in the classroom, promote questioning in research, rather than thinking of dissent as the malaise in the system. But those who want to control will always think of dissent and independence of thought as a malaise which needs to be eliminated. Whereas our systems, our society must promote questioning far more than what is done at the moment. So what are the misspecified elements in the new economic policy? It's more of the same. We're talking about model public universities for holistic and multidisciplinary education. But this goes against autonomy. All universities and all colleges should be autonomous. That means they should have their own curricula, they should have their own way of doing it rather than follow model public universities. JNU should not be a model for other universities. Even when JNU was better, JNU has got destroyed completely in the last 4-5 years. But even earlier, I would never recommend that JNU be the model that other universities should follow. They should evolve their own and use the faculty to evolve that. Then the idea of multidisciplinarity education, it's quite a vague idea that has been put forward. It's like saying a history student should also do economics. But that's not the way interdisciplinarity comes. It comes when you introduce economics within the history course and introduce history within the economics course. So when this was having its development, economics courses devised some 10, 12 years back, I'd argued that we need interdisciplinarity by informing one subject into the other subject rather than having somebody do one subject and the second subject and the third subject. That's not the way to do interdisciplinarity. Similarly, faculty needs to be given freedom to design own curricular and pedagogical approaches. But it says within approved framework. But when you say within an approved framework, again it would undermine autonomy. So I can say that my public finance course, which I taught from 84 to 2015, was a unique course. Such a course did not exist anywhere else in the world. And I enjoyed teaching that, and I taught it from my heart. If I had to only copy within an approved framework, I would probably not have delivered as good lectures or got the students as interested as I probably managed to do. When it says talent will be identified early and trained through a ladder of leadership positions, this is addressing the leadership question, but this is the sure short way of bureaucratization and cronyism, because who will be selected? The people who are the favorites of those who are in power. So therefore, this is something which should be anathema to institutions of higher education. The leadership position must come out of academic achievements, academic excellence, not because somebody has shown some bureaucratic tendencies right from the beginning. Then there's talk of teachers training, but the question: how do teachers learn to teach? In higher education, it's not possible that you can teach the teachers how to. It's out of the interest of the teacher. So I can give 100 indifferent lectures and bore the students to death, or I can give one inspired lecture and spark the students. So therefore, teachers, for instance, in schools have to undergo B.Ed education, but by and large, when they teach, they are doing rote learning. My son was going to a very elite school in Delhi, and I found that the teaching was completely rote learning, and teachers' interaction with the students was also quite mechanical. I offered to teach economics to class 11, 12 students, and I devised games. And I said I can teach the students by playing games with them. And the teacher said, no, you can't do that. You have to finish the course, and the course has to be finished in such and such time. So then I said, look, okay, in that case, you teach, you'll be better at teaching that rather than, me teaching the standard way of dictating notes in the class and the students, reproducing that in the exam. So how do we teach teachers to teach well? That, is a very difficult issue. The NRF is being thought of for competitively funding research in all disciplines. But how is that different from the current situation where, there are different agencies who are, funding research? There could also be, bureaucratization in the NRF, and there could be cronyism there, which, is very difficult to cope with. Then there's question of regulation of higher education, and it's said that it will be light, but it's not very clear what this light regulation would imply. Now, there's also mention of COVID-19 there. Now, this is a new challenge that has come up to us because there are new directions emerging. We are not able to teach in the usual way with COVID-19. There's a deep digital divide. Reports are coming in that large number of poor children, they're not able to access, the classes that are being taught through the net because either they don't have electricity or they don't have the devices or the internet connectivity is very poor or that they lack attention. So attention deficit is also there. And because of this distance learning, there's growing alienation and there's elitism because elite children are able to have the facility with which they can learn. So this growing digital divide is something that we have to worry about, and the alienation that sets in also something that we need to think about. So the question is, in a developing and highly unequal society, how do we develop socially relevant knowledge? That is the challenge that is before us. And the society's resource base is contracted enormously as a result of this challenge of the COVID-19, because the GDP has gone down dramatically. According to me, it has fallen by something like 50% in April, May, June. It's recovering a little, but the GDP will be down very substantially in our society, which means that there'll be shortage of resources for education and health. So even though education and health will remain crucial, but resource allocation to these sectors will decline. And therefore, we have to see how to give good education and health with little resources or with less resources, and how to incorporate the poor people in this. So a new balance is needed, and that new balance is something that we have to start thinking about. Now, to conclude, society is deeply divided and unequal, and it's becoming more so because of what is happening in education. It's becoming much more materialistic as a society, so sacrifice is no more a virtue. Everybody is going in for money, and success is judged by the amount of money that one can make, and the commercial success is very important, and that's why coaching and tuitions and so on have become widespread, and these do not lead to learning and new knowledge generation. And as a result of all this, commercialization is followed, and that is anti-equity, etc. Commitment to society is declining, and that is not conducive to improve the status of learning and knowledge generation. Autonomy, which is crucial, as I've been pointing out, it has to be at all levels. It has to be at the level of the vice chancellor or principal, the department, and the individual faculty member, and then only we'll have accountability. But this idea is missing in the new education policy. Indian society has little respect for knowledge generation and has got used to borrowing it from abroad. This needs to change. This, which was changed, lost a long time back during the colonial period, has continued in the post-independence period, and our education policies have not been able to change that, and we continue to borrow knowledge vastly from abroad. So we don't respect universities, we don't respect independent thinkers, because we feel we can always borrow. So how should poverty be studied? The World Bank provides the framework. It has to be studied on the basis of the market. And that's why from the 80s, a lot of poverty studies were funded by foreign agencies like the World Bank, etc. All studies said that it's the market which will help overcome poverty, but it actually is the market process which marginalizes the poor. So many such examples exist of how when we borrow knowledge, then it is not based on our context. Now the elite therefore looks up to Western modernity and tries to copy it. So the idea of world-class universities and getting them to come to India is also going to be a disaster, because this will also set the context within which knowledge would be generated in social sciences. It's different maybe in pure sciences, but even in terms of technologies, it gives a framework. So I think we have to create our own world-class universities rather than get the world-class universities to come to India and set up base here. So the idea is that what can work in one context may not work in a different context. So what are world-class universities in America or Britain may not be what we need. So borrowing ideas from advanced countries will not deliver in the Indian system necessarily. Also, teachers are being replaced by technology, and their role in making children into citizens is declining. Alienation is growing, and with alienation and lack of employment, many of the young people are open to irrational ideas. When understanding does not build, and when the future is unclear, one is not sure of getting a job, then the past looks very glorious, and one can fill the mind with ideas that may be very irrational. So, for instance, in the case of many students, they are told that the past was glorious and we must go back to that. And we had internet then, we had the television, and we had various other aeroplanes in the period of Ramayana and Mahabharata, and we had nuclear weapons, etc. And if we are not discerning and discriminating, then we believe it. So therefore, it leads to irrational ideas in society. And COVID is aggravating the entire problem, because children are not able to socialize, so alienation is growing. So the question is, can promises in NEP be fulfilled without transforming society? And therefore, in my judgment, it's the transformation of society that is a crucial aspect of transforming education for development of knowledge generation. and that transformation of society depends on socio-economic movements. We need to have socio-economic movements which will instill the confidence in us that we can generate new knowledge and that we don't need to copy knowledge. So the social context of any policy is very crucial, and that's what I feel the NEP must look at and must cater to. Otherwise, we have very nice words and nice writing, but we don't achieve the great goals that are set out in policy. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Arun Kumar sir, for that last 45 minutes. He had given us a very good message, very good talk on national education policy, and also he explained quite well on what are the problems, challenges, what does educational policy have, what we can say about national education policy and all those things. Let me highlight some of the points that he has discussed. He started his talk by saying challenge of knowledge generation. Institutions are under attack. Education should be able to take next generation to move towards cutting edge of knowledge and socially relevant knowledge. We should equip new generation to face the challenges of the future. Also, Professor Arun Kumar then pointed out the specific problem that education is facing today by citing the example of Bihar, high spread of cheating, problem of common syllabus growing, plagiarism, proliferation of coaching institutions, education system is quite mechanical and bureaucratized, not heard. And after 1990s, education is completely linked with market, not with knowledge, and knowledge generation has become secondary. Growing alienation in society and education, weakening social interlinkages, particularly Dalits, we of education. The problem that we come across, our state does not want dissent. Enterprises want cheap labor. Indian society is segmented and feudal in outlook. Historical continuation, actually, education policy. From highly formalistic, many feel no link with their lives. Autonomy and accountability are another formalistic missing. Another issue Professor Arun Kumar pointed out is educational institutions led by bureaucratized minds, weakening teachers, dignity of teachers, eroded already now. Management control up, academic autonomy down, part-time teachers recruited, API eroded teachers' dignity, student-teacher relationship weakened by marketization, and also a feudal or bureaucratic mindset believe in control, and any dissent is to be controlled and stopped. Academic activity cannot be mechanically measured. API or other emoluments, standards cannot be achieved by standardization. Excellence comes from heart. Professor Arun Kumar also talked about misspecified elements in education policy. Idea of multidisciplinarity is quite vague. Modern public universities, within approved framework, faculties are given freedom to design their curriculum and pedagogical approach itself as against academic autonomy. Academic autonomy is curtailed. Plenty of bureaucratic and cronyism can be found in national education policy. National Research Fund said NEP is not different from funding structure. There is deep digital divide, growing elitism and alienation. So, and finally, he concluded by saying commercialization will follow, and that will promote alienation of students from universities. Teachers are being replaced by technology. National education policy looks up to Western universities and Western modernity and tries to copy it. People open to Iran idea glorious, little priority to knowledge generation. Instead of bringing world-class institutions, we should build world-class institutions. So we concluded saying by that. Anyway, for the last 45 minutes, we've been listening to the talk delivered by Professor Arun Kumar. I know that there are plenty of questions and clarifications, time for questions. So also participants can share your questions via chat box. Or Professor Arun Kumar sir, is it convenient to you to answer question by question or answering a group of questions?
No, no. You can see how many questions there are, then we can.
Okay. Now it's time for the participants to shoot up your questions. Thank you.
Good evening, Professor Arun Kumar. Sir, I am Jason Jose from St. Aloysius College, Thrissur.
Yes.
So I completely agree with your views on API score and all, and I feel that it dilutes student and teacher relationship, and it promotes rather unhealthy competition within the departments among the colleagues. And so my question is, can the universities think of switching over to more progressive methods like measuring the performance of a faculty by measuring the performance of the students, like their outcome, and especially the way a teacher conducts student support program or outreach programs? Can do the universities have the capacity to switch over to such a kind of student-centered system rather than promoting selfishness and self-development among the staff? What do you think about that? Do the capacities of the universities completely decide it on their own, or will they have to stick to the UGC norms?
So this sticking to the UGC norm itself is a violation of the autonomy of the faculty. I think the problem is different. The problem is that if you get highly motivated faculty, then they will automatically deliver. And that's why, JNU Teachers Association put out a document in 1997 after the Story Committee report had come, and there was a lot of protest about the Story Committee. And there we had argued that let the faculty have just one grade, no division between assistant professor, associate professor, and professor, and let people produce research, let them do teaching, because like in any system, some will not be able to deliver, but they have the promise to deliver, and some will be able to deliver. So I think higher education is not like a factory. It's not like the police or the army, where you can measure by how many hours you spend, and how much production you've done. So whether students, how the students perform, not just in the exam but in life, that would how do you measure that? So that would be very difficult. So I think the universities have to be very liberal and allow once you've got a good recruitment system and you take the faculty in, then you allow the faculty member to go ahead with whatever research and teaching program that is there. Okay, and that will then produce good results over a period of time. It is true that some people will not be able to deliver, but that's a part of the waste. Even when you produce, say, a car, some defects come in, and then you reject those cars. So not everything would be perfect. So I am for very liberal education system in which you get highly motivated faculty. So your recruitment system has to be very good. If your recruitment system is very effective and very good, then I think the faculty will automatically start delivering. And trying to mechanically measure by some yardstick or the other, you'll then straitjacket people, and this bureaucratization will come in and control mechanism will come in.
So thank you, sir. Thank you. Very, very insightful thoughts, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening, sir. Answer question.
Yes.
Sir, the quality of education is entirely based.
Hello? 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 I can't hear.
Hello, sir. Is it audible?
Yeah.
Sir, quality of education is entirely based on quality of teaching. What are the components of a quality of teaching, and who is an ideal evaluator for assess the quality of teaching? Whether students or a community is ideal evaluators for assessing the quality of teaching. These are the things. These are doubts. And another question: whether there is any minimum level of learning for UG level, or whether there is any minimum level of learning for PG level.
So as I was saying, you can give 100 indifferent lectures and bore the students to death, and they will not learn from you. And you can give one inspired lecture, and that will make the students spark, and they will then start learning on their own. So teaching has a very sort of dialogic relationship with the students. If you can establish a dialogue with the students, then your teaching will be good. If you're not able to establish a dialogue, if you do it very mechanically, dictate rules, then you're not going to spark interest in the students. So a good teacher is one who will produce that spark in the students. And then, in any university or college, you find, automatically the students gravitate towards some teachers, but not towards other teachers. Because those teachers, the students are able to establish a contact with, a link with, and they learn from that teacher. So therefore, it's a very difficult thing to define in very mechanical terms. And that's why, I'm not in favor of, setting up some kind of yardstick. At Princeton, we had some very good teachers and some very poor teachers, but they were all doing great research. So therefore, some people may be good researchers but not good teachers. Some may be very good teachers but not good researchers. All kinds of mix that's possible. That's why we have to allow in the university different models of teaching, different models of research. But we should not, undermine the teachers. What is happening in our Indian education system is that we undermine the teachers in a variety of ways. And the bureaucracy in the colleges and the university is a part of that undermining of the teaching and so on, because you don't give autonomy. You try to straight-jacket teachers, So our problems are at a very multiple level, and it's a very difficult thing to measure. So I would say that, a liberal education system is what we need, where, you recruit people, you recruit them well, you recruit people who have shown the, the mettle of learning, and when you recruit them, they will come in and they will deliver. If you have, say, in the university and in the college, some people who are excelling, then they become the role models for other teachers, and they become the thing that the junior teachers will copy and the others will copy, and then everybody will, come in and do good teaching. So I think, it's a very, very nebulous kind of a situation, but this is because education is unlike factory production. It's unlike, what a police would do or what a bureaucracy would do. So you can't use the yardsticks. And unfortunately, the yardsticks that are available, mechanical yardsticks, are all coming from bureaucracy, from factory production, and so on. So we need to have a very different kind of a model for institutions of education. And, when you ask, what kind of education should there be for teaching undergraduate and graduate courses, etc., I think we must treat them as integrated. Because, good graduate education comes from good undergraduate education, and good research comes from good graduate education. So I think that the qualification should be the same for whatever level of teaching in the colleges and universities. And that's why, in teachers associations and in the FedCuta, etc., the idea has been to de-bureaucratize, to have fewer gradations. Not have assistant professor and within that 3 grades, and associate professor within that 2 grades, and professors and within that 3 grades. There should be one continuous one, so that people can naturally transit from whatever they are, and then salary will just keep on increasing. So rather than have different segments of teaching community, it should be all one. With ad hoc teachers and part-time teachers and guest teachers, that category should completely be eliminated, and we should have permanent faculty, which once it's taken in, has a free route till its retirement.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor N. Kumar.
Yeah.
My name is Eddie Thomas. I teach history in Christian College, Chennai. And thank you for your fascinating lecture. You have placed things in a larger philosophical context. Like the issue is much deeper, and we cannot see things on the surface. Like you said, standardization doesn't bring quality, and it's not a guarantee for quality or constant anxiety for APA score. And I think issue is the heart of the issue is the teacher-student relationship and how it is affecting, and because seeing teacher and student as a co-travelers in education. And I think that's very very interesting and insightful observation. I think that's the core of our educational thinking. And my greater concern is what will be the future of our public universities, because already there is an attempt to destroy our public institutions like JNU, for example, and at the cost of JNU, we see even the rise of Ashoka, Shivnadar, and many of these private universities. And if I make a comparison, like what happened to BSNL, and similarly, I think this attempt to destroy our public institutions is systematic. Like so, what will be the future for public universities? That in the case of will they survive this? I think that's my.
Yeah. So, you're absolutely right. First we destroyed the government schools so that the private schools could prosper. If government schools had been run properly with proper funding, then private schools would not have thrived. Similarly, now if in JNU and Delhi University you can do undergraduate work for 15 rupees a month, why would you pay a few lakhs of rupees per year in Ashoka, etc., when the reputation of JNU or of Delhi University was better than that of, say, Ashoka or Shiv Nada University, etc. So destroying public universities is one way of helping the private universities and private colleges to do better. So that is very clear. But I think what COVID has shown is that there's need for public education, for cheap education, because pandemics will keep coming. If you look at the last 20 years, we've had Nipah, we've had SARS and MERS and Zika, and we've had Ebola, and Ebola was had high rate of mortality. This COVID is very virulent, but Ebola was not so virulent. So what we need is high quality education so the population is less alienated. Alienated population will not do what the policymaker wants it to do. And the high degree of inequality that exists in the country is one of the reasons why our rate of growth has fallen far more than that of the other G20 countries. We have been the worst hit because we have such an unequal system where there's a huge unorganized sector which employs 94% of the workforce, etc. So we'll have to, if we are to cope with the challenge, and the next pandemic could be, which is as virulent as this COVID, and which is as high a mortality as Ebola, then large number of people could die very quickly. So we have to be prepared, and for that high quality education and having less inequality, those will be very critical. So I think we'll have to rethink our development paradigm. Our development paradigm based on neoclassical thinking of marketization is not going to deliver in those circumstances. Even in the last 6 months, you've seen that the public hospitals are delivered far more than the private hospitals did. Or, for instance, when people have to be brought back from abroad, then the Air India, which was a hugely loss-making venture, is the one that was used. And, similarly, trains were used to move people, the Shamik Expresses, etc. So the instrument in the hand of community or society is the public sector. And if we undermine public sector, then we undermine our capacity to deal with crisis. So I think, a deep rethinking is required of the development paradigm that we have in our country. And this is where I think, we are going towards a new normal and a new thinking would be required. And I'm hoping that this new thinking would then begin to once again strengthen the public education system, which is not to say that the private sector will not have a role. The private sector will continue to play a role, but this balance has been completely changed after 1991, where the public universities and the public institutions lack funding, where the private sector is coming up with huge amount of funding and producing elite education. So education has to be democratized also, and it has to be made, so the balance has to be restored between public and private education.
Professor Arun Kumar.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your very thought-provoking lecture. I am Sebastian from UC College, Alva, Kochi.
Yes. Yes.
May I ask you one question? The present regime.
Yes.
I'm a history teacher. That's why I'm asking this.
Yes.
The present regime bank upon the glorious past of India, if at all something exists like that, and at the same time subjecting India to the forces of a corporatized economic culture, something, as Naomi Gilmer also says, something like disaster capitalism. Does it make a sense of mixing the past? The past, in their terms, it is actually the heritage. which belong to some people, in such a way that this corporatized interests reinforce both mutually reinforce that is both the corporatized interests of the capitalists or the disaster capitalists and the people who advocate about this glorious past, whether they mutually reinforce, making the people actually standing without any orientation, which is right and which is wrong in that sense. What is your comment on this?
So, you're right that this move towards corporatization, which I mentioned as commercialization that is taking place in education, and as I said, the very poor standards of education, that does not help children build an understanding of society. And coupled with the fact that, corporate sector would like very docile labor, it wouldn't like questioning labor, it wouldn't like managers and workers to be questioning so that they comply with whatever corporate sector wants, with whatever the government wants. Now, these kind of people, do not have an understanding of life. They're alienated, and they can then be fed with all kind of irrational ideas. Because when you are in a crisis, you think that the past was glorious. When you're not able to get jobs, and this corporatized thing is leading to jobless growth, large number of children not able to get jobs. Even if they get jobs, they get very menial kind of jobs. So large number of people in India don't have a living wage, and that's what you see that 94% of the workforce is in the unorganized sector, which doesn't have clean drinking water, doesn't have proper housing, which doesn't have proper toilet facilities, doesn't have proper education facilities, etc. So, this kind of dichotomized India, the dichotomized growth, that has also built an understanding which is, lacking, which is alienating. So what I find is that, it is these people who are in a crisis. And that crisis of corporatization and marginalization and inequality and of lack of proper education makes them open to irrational ideas. So, one can say that the past was glorious because in the Ramayana time we had aeroplanes, and in Mahabharata time, we had internet, and we had all the technology that there exists today in the past, and people will believe that because they are told that the past was glorious and you can spin any story around it, and that gives them a sense of achievement that at least our past was glorious even if the future is not very certain. So I think it's this mix of alienation, this very poor education that large number of children get. That is what is being utilized by the current political system to divert attention from the real issues that face the people. So even though during demonetization, large number of people were unemployed, large number of people lost their jobs, large number of people had low incomes, they suffered a lot, and yet, they voted for the party that was in power, which had brought about demonetization. So, in other words, you can always trump the reality of life with emotional issues. You can use very divisive issues to create, a milieu in which you can get the vote. So it's a very deadly mix that we are confronted with between alienation that is growing because of corporatization, between the poor quality education that is imparted to very large number of children, and the lack of employment opportunities. So the future is very bleak for large number of people. It's this deadly mix that enables the present politics to continue the way it is.
So there was one question in the chat box by Dr. Krishna Kumar. What about your opinion about tenure tracking system?
Acha. About tenure
Exactly.
tenure track, yeah. So in the West they have the tenure track, and that seems to have worked quite well for them. It's like saying that you have a initial period of which we also have of 2 years of probation, and then you get a tenure track. We have to have some kind of a starting point in which the performance may be judged through teaching, through research, and so on, and then one can go in for this. But I would say that we need a proper recruitment system. The recruitment system at the moment is very heavily biased towards bureaucratized, mechanical recruitment. We need to have a recruitment system in which the entire faculty is involved, not just a selection committee. And in that way, we can judge the performance of our candidate through his presentation, through his seminar, through the research that is done. That would be a much better way, a more democratized way of recruitment, because the person who joins the faculty is going to be there for the next 30, 40 years and would contribute to the faculty, its research and its teaching program. So, in a more democratized system, I think the chances of choosing somebody for bureaucratic reasons, etc., would be far less. So I think we need to modify our recruitment system for faculty. That is the way to go. Then after that, whether you have 1 year probation or 2 year probation really doesn't matter. That person would perform well, and therefore, you would be able to have a permanent position. And then, as I said, don't have so many divisions. Assistant professor 3 divisions, associate professor 2 divisions, and then within professor 3 divisions. That division segmentation within the teaching community is not good. I think everybody is a professor. Once you are, permanent, then you should just continue in that, and your salary would continue to increase, so everybody could be called a professor right from the beginning.
Yes, sir. There's a question from the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I'll share that.
Yes, please.
It's from PVK Rao, and I guess he means to ask: will the uncontrolled autonomy create anarchy?
Okay, that's a good question. That whether autonomy can create anarchy. The question is, autonomy will allow freedom, and that's what generates knowledge. You can call it anarchy, but I don't think it will lead to anarchy. The moment you say that we'll control autonomy, we will only allow this kind of autonomy, it will lead to bureaucratization, and then knowledge generation would be a problem. So I think the academic system, which is allowing autonomy, will build its own system of things which will help in keeping things within a broad framework. So I think let the academic system itself devise, and each university may have its own way of devising, how people would do their research and teaching. So I don't think one can call it anarchy. If you are generating ideas in different directions, that I don't think is a problem. One can call it anarchy, but after all, if you are in economics and you are doing research in economics and finding out new ways of thinking about it. Like I have always studied the black economy, and for a long time, not many people studied the black economy. But the moment demonetization came, everybody started looking at the black economy. So one could say that I was a bit anarchical, when I used to teach black economy in my Indian economy course or in public finance course, and nobody else taught that. But I thought that was important. And finally, people admit that it's very important to understand black economy because it undermines the Indian economy as a whole. So, what is anarchy and what is knowledge generation? I think we have to be very circumspect about calling it anarchical. And I would welcome different kinds of knowledge to be generated. That is how society would advance. The knowledge generation would advance. So I wouldn't categorize that as anarchy if people are generating new ideas.
Sir, thank you for a very thought-provoking session. Is there any proposal in the present NEP to ensure social inclusion in Indian society, which is highly hierarchical in nature?
Well, there are all very nice things, and everything, as I said, is there about, equity and equality and so on and so forth. But as I said, it ultimately depends on the social milieu within which it is implemented. None of the policies that have come earlier have been against social inclusion. But, in practice, it doesn't happen. It will only happen when, the faculties are given the autonomy to practice teaching and research in the way they would like, and when they question authority. If we keep saying that Einstein is the last word in physics, then knowledge would not advance. If we keep saying Amartya Sen is the last word in economics, then knowledge would not advance. So for social inclusion also, it's very important that we keep challenging the existing knowledge. And the more autonomy you have, the more the challenge would come from different sources. If autonomy is curtailed, then you are only going to be doing research in a certain set pattern, in a certain set milieu. And therefore, social inclusion would be not there. You'll be socially excluding because that is the way the tradition is. So therefore, the challenge to existing knowledge is very crucial. And that is where I think our society has not welcomed that. It has not enabled that to happen. So we need to enable that to happen, where more and more research comes in, which will then lead to social inclusion becoming a central part of our thing. And as I said, Professor Purat in our seminar in 2004 had already said that for Dalits, education is very alienating. So how do we make it non-alienating? That's where social inclusion will come in. That's where I think thinkers have to come forward. Those who will challenge the current knowledge, and they will be the ones who will then bring about more social inclusion.
So there are a couple of questions in the chat box. May I read it for you, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. By Manish Jacob, he is asking you have mentioned about learn how to learn. In fact, it's essential to train people that how to learn and how to think. Then only new knowledge creation and betterment of life will happen. Do you present higher education system? Teachers in higher education do this job aware of this?
See, that's what I was arguing, that currently we teach very mechanically, we do research very mechanically, we don't challenge research. For instance, I'll give you a concrete example from black economy. Because of black economy, the entire data set of the Indian economy is incorrect. And when we do research mechanically in economics, then we use the current database, which is erroneous, and we come to conclusions. But if you use erroneous database and come to your conclusions, then that will be also an error. So learning to learn means learning to question. Learning to question whatever exists, whatever is the theory that exists. And that is how you see paradigm changes have taken place in science. That is how things have changed in the social sciences, that when you question, the existing knowledge. So learning to learn means to be able to question and come with answers to those questions. Unfortunately, most of the time, we teach the students only to learn by rote. So whatever is told to them, they mug up and they reproduce, but they don't question it. So the written word, whatever is printed word, we take that as gospel truth. Whereas what we have to teach the students is critical thinking. That is, that if something is mentioned by the teacher, then the student should be able to incorporate that into his or her own framework, and then find out what is it that they are not understanding, and then ask the question. But mostly in the classroom, I find teachers do not encourage such questioning because they think of those students as troublemakers. And therefore, the students are told to shut up or to keep quiet and not disturb the class. Now, some children may be disturbing because they have an attention deficiency, but a lot of children may be asking questions genuinely because they're not understanding, or there's a new direction of thought. So I have found in my own class teaching that when some child asks a question, it gives me a new way of thinking, And some of my papers have come out of some questions that have been asked in the class, because when I'm trying to answer that question, I realize that there's something missing in the theory, which is why the child is not understood. And what I had thought was understandable in a certain way is not really understandable. So learning to learn means being open to ideas, being open to teaching in a way that you get questions asked. It is that you don't tell your PhD students to only follow certain lines of thinking, that you keep your mind open to new ideas. So that is what learning to learn means. And I don't think that can be taught by going through formal coursework. That can be taught only by a PhD guide to the PhD student, how to question, and when in questioning and then trying to answer, you learn. So I think it's not a mechanical process of learning to learn. So that's why I've been arguing that we don't know how to produce an Einstein systematically. Einsteins just happen. Somebody who's a great mind just happens. It's not because our system has produced it. But if we allow more and more children to question, more and more children to, be open to ideas, then we'll produce many more Einsteins and so on. So it's a very complex process, and that's what knowledge generation, new knowledge generation is a very complex process. That's why I'm saying that the social milieu is very important, which encourages everybody to question, which encourages people to ask questions and then try to answer them.
Hi, sir. Sir.
Hello?
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, I'm Asha Prabhakaran from NSS College for Women, Trivandrum.
Yes.
Thank you for that one presentation, sir. You presented actually a long list of points worth considering regarding NEP. I'm particularly interested by your take on the weakening teacher-student relationship, and you were talking about how teaching, the relational character has eroded through these ages. Now, my question is, how can we mold ourselves to be better versions or better teachers in the wake of so many threats and interventions by the society as well as the authorities? We are all part of a system.
Yes. So that's what I was answering in the previous question, that, teachers have a unique situation in which, you cannot be easily displaced. You cannot be easily, questioned if you develop a closer relationship with the students. What has happened is, because of the API system and because of the very mechanical way we judge our education and our contribution, we have had a very mechanical relationship with our students also. That's why we teach through notes and through, trying to get the students to mug up and reproduce that in the exam so they can get good marks. Whereas if we make them question, we answer their questions and we get them to question the knowledge that is existing, that is the only way that we can build a better relationship with them and make them into better citizens. Because the more they question, the more they will learn and the more they will be fulfilled in life. So, it is this kind of characteristic that I was arguing for, that autonomous teachers who are not, sort of bowed down, who are not sycophants, who don't, simply reproduce. So, like, for instance, once I remember one of my PhD students, I gave him some papers to read to start the PhD. He says, "Sir, how can I critique Samuelson and, Stiglitz? They are great." So I said, "But that is precisely your task. You have to begin by questioning what is missing in the existing literature. And, the grades are the ones that you have to learn in such a way that you find what may be missing in them. So one can't say that, if somebody is great, then only." So, that gives confidence to the student that they can question the existing knowledge. And if they can question the existing knowledge, then they'll start, be more open to new ideas. And I think if I succeeded in getting my students to question the basics, then I've succeeded. I've built a teacher-student relationship, and I've also made them into better citizens who can question authority. So the task of higher education is new knowledge generation, which is socially relevant, and that will be helped when people begin to question what exists.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Yes, sir. Myself, Rakesh from Alapura. At the very outset, thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful informative session. So my query is regarding the research component, which has been mentioned in the NEP. So in the policy, it has been mentioned that the research proposal can be invited from philanthropic agencies. Even though it sounds good, my concern is that if it affects what happens to the research proposal from a government or aided college when it competes with these high-tech institutions which normally runs by these philanthropic agencies, and how the outcome of those research activities, whether it will meet the requirement of our country or the requirement of those agencies, which is essential for their companies to grow. This is my query, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so very often the research grant agencies have their own agenda. There are very few agencies which don't have their agenda. Whether you get funds from abroad, whether you get funds from agencies which are private, they are seeking to strengthen their own agendas. So that's my first problem, and that's why I'd like public funding to be strengthened. So that a large amount of research is done by public funding, which is not to say that some philanthropic organizations may also have a more liberal agenda and they may allow research to be done. But then it depends on who are the people who are controlling those philanthropic organizations, whether they themselves have some kind of an agenda. So many of the rich Indians have contributed money to, Harvard and Cambridge and so on, and there they want to establish their name, and they give them autonomy. But when they contribute to Indian universities, they actually have some agenda, some way of entering into the control of the universities and so on, having a say in the universities. So I would say that in the Indian context, it is very important to have public funding rather than having these philanthropic organizations funding. So some amount of funding is okay, but by and large, I would go for public funding. There also, again, the question of control comes in, because even the public institutions are run by people who would like to push certain agenda. So this question of autonomy, of the research funding by the government, that would come in. And that is a very tricky question to do. Unless the academic community stands up as a whole and pushes for autonomy, it's not going to happen. Politicians and bureaucrats will push their own agendas, but that has to be challenged. And that's why I mentioned that what we need are socio-economic political movements, and teachers have to create these movements so that we can wrest control of education policy from bureaucrats and politicians. We are very divided. We become very sycophantic very quickly. Many senior bureaucrats and politicians who I've interacted with in the last 30, 40 years, they say that many senior professors will begin to bend the moment they are given a committee membership. And it has happened recently in economics also. Many senior people in the government who have retired, they have told me that we can't take a critical line against the government because the government consults us. And if we take a critical line, then they will not consult us. And we want to remain in power, because when they consult us, then we are able to influence, we are able to get our students placed there, or, things like that. Similarly, for instance, World Bank, IMF, I remember in 1983 when I was in a National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, some of the young economists there used to say that if we get a 3-month consultancy with the World Bank, we can buy a car. If we can get a 1-year consultancy with the World Bank, we can buy a house. So, basically people are willing to modify their thinking because, of the influence. And that's how the World Bank, ADB, IMF, etc. are able to have a large clout with our bureaucracy, with our academia, with our media, because they hold seminars, they invite people, etc. And this has been going on since about 85, after 75 when the emergency was launched. So the influence of all these people has increased, and that is why the research in India has suffered quite substantially, and independent thinking has suffered a great deal in India.
So there are a couple of questions in the chat box. Dr. Arunas Prasad is asking that affiliated colleges are supposed to be the democratic center of higher education system. Whether this autonomy for colleges can ensure the same.
Our systems are highly bureaucratized, and that's why we think that colleges have to be affiliated to some university so that the autonomy is maintained and the management of the college doesn't undermine the autonomy. So like in Delhi University, you have large number of affiliated colleges, and the autonomy of the teachers comes because there's an academic council and there's an executive council in the university which protects the autonomy of the college teachers. So the worry is that if it becomes an independent college, then the management would become very much in control, and they would then undermine the autonomy. Now, if we have a teachers movement which is strong, then this would not happen. But if the teachers movement itself is very weak, then this kind of thing would happen. So again, it depends on the social milieu. So like in the US, almost every college and university is an independent college or university, and they're able to maintain standards because the wider academic community recognizes the need for autonomy and defends autonomy. In India, that has not been happening, and that's why we have found that autonomous colleges can easily get bureaucratized or can undermine the autonomy of faculty, etc. So India's social milieu has to change, and for that the onus is on us teachers. We have to create the movements. We have to become stronger, and we have to demand that policy making should be in the hand of the academics, not the bureaucratized academics. And we must challenge the bureaucratized academics also, who try and control everything in a certain way. So the onus is on us. We are the thinkers in society. We are the ones who benefited from higher education. We have had the luxury of benefiting from education, good education, and that's why we become teachers. So onus is on us to create the conditions in which autonomy is there. Once autonomy exists and the wider checks and balances are created, then I think this problem of autonomous colleges would also disappear. But till then, the problem of autonomous colleges would remain very substantial, and autonomy will come from wider structures where academic councils and executive councils function as bodies which give some degree of autonomy. But as we saw in Delhi University, as we've seen in JNU, even the academic councils and the executive council can be backed by the bureaucracy of the university. And in JNU now, decisions are taken very mechanically because they've packed the academic council, discussion doesn't take place. So the question of autonomy can be undermined even in the present system. So we have to all get up. We all have to take active part in movements to preserve the autonomy and the accountability of the education system.
The next question is from our Honorable Secretary himself, Padmanabhan sir. The question is, the new economic National Education Policy 2020 repeats the Kothari Commission proposal for setting about 6% of GDP for education. Could you say something about the changing patterns of public funding in education ever since independence?
So, the idea of 6% of GDP was that we need to have strong public education. And this was a global standard that was set up. But as far as I know, public education has never received more than 4.1%. And recently, this percentage has come down. And we are told always that there is not enough resources in the country, that the country lacks resources. But I believe that the question of resources is a question of priority. If we give education a high priority, which we have not given, if we give higher education a high priority, which we have not given, then we could not only spend 6%, but we could even go to 10%. And I'm told that many of the Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia and so on, Thailand, they spend even 10% of GDP on education, on public education. And through that, they managed to get all children into schools by 1965, which we never did. And they also managed to give high quality education, and their progress depended on that. So as Amartya Sen in his 1986 paper said, that the difference between Southeast Asia and India is that they spent a lot on education and health, and they produced a productive workforce, and that's how their productivity went up, and that's how they did very well and moved up in the world, which we haven't done. China has also been spending a lot of money on public education so that they can create a highly skilled workforce. So we haven't done that, and we need to do that. And the question of resources is very clearly a question of priority, as I was saying. And if we check the black economy, then we could get enough resources. The black economy is 62% of GDP. If that was brought into the tax net, then we could get an extra 24% tax GDP ratio. And out of that, we can spend enough. Going from 4% to 10% would not be difficult. Similarly, in the case of health, we are barely spending 1.2%, whereas if we need to spend 3%, we could go to even 5%. So we could have better health, better education, and better, funds for giving employment, etc. So checking the black economy is one way. But after all, if the corporate sector and the politicians who are benefiting from the black economy, and they don't want to check the black economy, and the black economy continues to grow. So it's a part of the political economy where we want a cheap labor force. We don't allow the workforce to have a living wage, because that would make it expensive. And if that makes it expensive, then there'll be a problem. So, this is where we have to hurry. I'm sorry, I have to go. 8 o'clock, there is another appointment. I'm sure there'll be other questions, but can we close now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. Today, we were able to listen at different perspectives from Professor Arun Kumar. It was quite vibrant and insightful talk. And I think we have taken more time for discussion than the lecture from Dr. Arun Kumar. So, also, we are very grateful to all the participants, particularly Jason Joseph, Suresh Chandrakur, Sebastian Joseph, Krishna Kumar, Eddie Thomas, Manish Jacob, PVK Rao, Rakesh, Asha Prabhakaran, Arun S. Prasad, Patmanabhan Sir, Vidal, for raising a question. Thank you very much for your patient listening. So I think it's time for me to conclude before inviting Dr. Sanand for proposing vote of thanks. Actually, teacher, is there any announcements for about the next program or something like that?
No, I said that in the beginning, in the welcome speech. And I can repeat, our next session is scheduled on 15 September. And it's the talk by Dr. Ishita Gopale. Okay, I elaborated on that in my welcome speech.
Okay. And thank you very much once again. And now over to you, Anand, for proposing the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Vijay sir. Due to time constraints, I am not entering too much details of this session. Respected Arun Kumar sir, President and Secretary, other office bearers of AKPCTA. This is the second lecture organized by academic committee, and the first one was on multidisciplinarity, and this one on knowledge generation. But here, Professor Arun Kumar covered a number of topics, a vast number of topics, like the challenges faced by higher education system and the UGC, autonomy, the APA system, and even the post-COVID scenario or the digital number of things. So, on behalf of academic committee and AKPCTA, I thank you, sir, for your framed, well-structured presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks and best wishes to everybody.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you. And as part of organizers, I also use this opportunity to thank the office bearers of AKPCTA, President Dr. Durji Alex sir, and Dr. Patmanabhan sir, Sri Kumar sir, Lakshmi Priya, Dr. Vijay Abraham, for make this program as a success. And I also used this opportunity to thank the IT wing of AKPCTA, those who make this program as a success and also make the wide coverage through Facebook Live and YouTube. And I also thank each and everyone those who present throughout this webinar and by asking a number of questions on various aspects. So I thank everyone on behalf of AKPCTA, especially AKPCTA Academic Committee. Thank you, and thank you all. And I conclude with this one word, like as Professor Arun Kumar said, a good teacher will produce spark in students. And I'm sure the sparks lighted through these talk by Arun Kumar will help us in our future struggles. Thank you everyone.
The meeting is over. Thank you.